Alright, folks, welcome back. It is day 17. 皆さん、お帰りなさい。今日は10、17日目です。Looks like today is a review day as well. We have 50 review exercises, which is gonna take like 10 minutes. Yesterday we encountered what? Let's do a little quick mistake. This was a typo. Typo largely because I don't actually know. Is it because I typed cross instead of 10? Or is it because Oh, Joel. I ended up typing J-O instead of J-U. That's fine. And then, of course, our proverbial power, which Riku and Doku, right? Riki and Doku. I typed Riku by accident as opposed to Riki. I'll be fine. Okay. And then obviously I think I typed sword, right? Sword instead of power. Alright. So let's get right into it. I don't think I'm not expecting anything to unlock. Maybe a vocabulary word. It's kind of difficult to know about the vocabulary word situation. Everything else is blocked out. So go. Pass. Right. Make sure I don't mistype Jew again. Okay. Oh. Double checking. Right. Go Power Rangers, right? Pass. Whoops. Pass. Oh, there, Walter. Thanks. Mada desu. Where was I? Eat. Right. Like the pass, right? Pass. Hone. For our honing skills. Pass. That might be actually for the okay. Because the vocabulary in the kanji has a slight bend to it. Okay. Say or show are correct. Car on fire. Pass. Not pass. Stopping when you need to stop, correct? Pass. Emu. Pass. What happened on 8th day? Yogurt in the car. Pass. Sheep. Pass. Go. Dog. Pass. Rendaku. Pass. What happened on the 6th day? Oh, muy bien. No. Not muy bien. Is it? No, it's 6 Is it really moose? Probably moose, right? The moose? Yes, moose. Okay. 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 Televisions. Pass. Pass with Noma. Pass. Pass. Oh, this one is a little bit shot in the dark for me, but to exit out of the dead room, right? Dead room. Dead. 10. 10%. Ritsu. Ritsu. Standing up, doorman. Ritsu. Make sure to write the Y. Pass. Exit the dead room. Right. Cho. Mrs. Cho. Pass. Pass. What happened on the 9th day? 9th day, coconut day? Meh. For sheep. Make sure not to typo. Jewels. You. Pass. The moon Getsu your Gutsu. N. Cultural. Pass. This is convergence, so converge. Oh, actually, no. On the 2nd day, no, just kidding. Futsu. Futsuka. So the circus story. Like a foot car. Yeah. Yabba dabba do. Not really, but I think of the Flintstones. Pass. Pass. Use. Right. Youth. Yo. Oh wait, not yo. You. Youths. Haku. White iPhone. MAKU. Swing. Swing. Sweet. Pass. Key. That's purple. Yeah, key. Pass? Pass. Sheep. Sheep in a suit. Sheep. Pass. What happened on the first day? Oh, the cheesy tweet. Tweet cheesy. Hama. Hamaru. Hamada. Hamada. Hand off the ball. Pass. Pass. So dead from the mouth. And then Nendaku. Right? What else was there in this mnemonic? Oh, the whale mnemonic, the Moby Dick mnemonic, and then the reminder on the Rendaku. Okay. Exit out of the mouth. That's fair. Pass. That was the whale mouth exit. Pass. Oh, they're Valentine. Moshi moshi. Pass. 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 This is muy bien car. Muy ka. Look at a narwhal from the right. Use. Look at a narwhal from the right. Genki desu. Valentine song wa? Ball. Right. What happened on the third day? Oh, driving Ko. Me. Ko as in me. No ka. What happened on the 10th day? Oh, I'm the talker. Toka. Oh. Oops. Toka. Gotta make sure I write the O. Well, watch it. Oh, nah, no ka. I think this one's one of my favorites so far. Anoka. Ooh, I'm pausing on this one. Let's make a note. Pause on this one. Okay. So. Hmm. Hmm. It's definitely being overpowered by Hansa Heroes mnemonic. Uh, so let's see. Writing sentence. Oh, it's un monster. Okay, I'll have to add something to that later. Okay. Pass. Was this still a pass? This was still a pass. 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 Wait. Still use, right? Use look from the right. Chew. Chewbacca. I don't know why I said Chewbacca that way. Pass. 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 Stop. Something, you went to something. Okay. You went to something. Character got the one day. Tomorrow. How does she go to a new game? New 3-day. Something dance shoe origins. Are you gonna buy something that looks like 3 country dance shoe dance pair? Also このゲーム漢字は難しいですね。Let's see what origins. What game has origins? I have no idea. Wait, which game has Origins as a edition, as a subtitle? So you went to, yeah, that's probably game. That's probably work. It looks like work. Oh yeah, shikoto. And then what could that be? That could be if you're doing something tomorrow and you're gonna buy. You're gonna have. Okay, so one, that's probably a good day. And then tomorrow, don't know the name of that title, but new 3 country something something, and then the kanji in the game is difficult. Yeah, that makes sense. Oh wait, 3, I guess that's probably a wartime Sengoku game. I haven't heard of this game, so which one are we talking about? Let's see. Oh, is that what they call the Dynasty Warriors thing? Is that how you write the name? No, I don't think so. Oh yeah, it is. Yeah, that is how you write Dynasty Warriors. Interesting. I keep forgetting that who makes this? I keep forgetting. Well, that's neat. If that is the Dynasty Warriors game, I'm pretty sure that is. The only reason I know that is the Dynasty Warriors game is because I seen it written in Chinese, which is exactly it's almost the same. That's the tradition. I guess that's the Japanese way, which is interesting because it's like a combination of simplified and traditional. Oh yeah, that's right. Koi. That's right, Koi. I was looking for I was trying to figure out who the parental publisher was. Koi. That's right. Koi Tecmo. Yeah, you know what's funny about that? The Japanese, I'm guessing you type the Japanese title of the game. It uses like a combination of traditional and simplified. You took a vacation day at work just to go and buy and play the game tomorrow? Oh. It looks pretty good. Like they broke their Omega Force, and Koei broke their losing streak. Oh, and what I mean by losing streak, just specifically for like the critically acclaimed, like reviews and stuff. Like people still love, like the player base still likes playing Dynasty Warriors. However, they broke their like losing streak with the gaming journalists, if you know what I mean. So that's kind of neat because the one before it was probably the all-time low. Neat. That's kind of hard to read, like figure out what that is. The meaning is interesting. You've heard Japanese uses a lot of traditional style characters. Yeah, 9 absolutely bombed. Yeah, the experimentation with the quote unquote open world design and adding like RPG elements. Japanese does use a lot of traditional style characters, yeah. Recently, because I've been learning Hanzo Hero on the side, it runs parallel with WaniKani a lot of times. I've encountered a few characters where the Japanese use simplified characters, which I haven't really noticed as much as I was going, but now that I'm looking at traditional characters too, there's ones that are interesting, especially in names. So in the Dynasty Warrior name, the second character for Guo, as in world or country, Goku. Goku is a simplified character. And then they went back to a traditional character for the third character and the fourth character, interestingly enough. So they kept the third is the traditional character, and then the two flanking it are simplified characters for the name styling. Hello, you're also an artist? Well, that's kind of nice, Linda. Glad to hear you're an artist. Alright, so let's get back to this. Oh wait, that's not the onyomi. Alright, let's not get distracted here too much. We're looking for Joe's toes. Oh. No, we're not. We're looking for the ka that the toe was found in. Okay. I think this is a pass. Sense. And pass. All of them are on the left hand. Saw in the left hand of the Norwals. Age comes, talent comes with age. Pass. 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 And a special note about sight. And pass. Shogun. Taco Field. Left hand. Pass. Pass. All king. Neat. Oh, we have one extra. Where did the one extra come from? Cheated? Is this a cheat? Yeah. Cheated. Pass. Alright. Konnichiwa, Gecko. Well, we finished. 30 minutes? Yeah, usually these go very quickly. Review. Oh, tomorrow is gonna be a big lesson. Tomorrow is gonna be a half lesson day. Or a third lesson day, it looks like, possibly. So I do see 6. I see 7, 8, 9 characters. So tomorrow is gonna be a little bit weird. Well, actually, let's go over this first before I end this. Do my ending remarks. Yeah, so I can't wait to hear what you think about Dynasty Warrior Origins. My budget is incredibly tight for 2025, so I'm probably not going to be playing Dynasty Warriors anytime soon. Oh, and it would bleed into everything for now. I'm kind of locked in until not that it's more of a budget thing, but more of a time budget thing. Pretty much locked in until April at most to have any wiggle room. As I've already locked in Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza. So for now, I'll hold off on revisiting my childhood. My first Dynasty Warriors was actually Dynasty Warriors 2, PlayStation 2 title. As I recall. And the nice thing about historic stuff like Romance of the Three Kingdoms saga and the Sengoku line of things, when it comes to kanji and Hanzi, is that they almost entirely overlap most of the time because of the period and the use of specific characters. They're historical characters, so they tend to overlap. And the reason why I know this before I ever played one after language learning is because I used to play those games. Regardless of what the text was, I was able to play those games. I learned by context, and context and imagery. So all the like the units and the stuff, and then those games use letter grades. A lot of times, they use the Roman characters for letter grades and performances. So I used to play like Genghis Khan, the games based on Genghis Khan's reign and whatnot back in the way early Koei Tecmo days. So you recognize a lot of like common characters between each of the things. Yeah. I haven't gone back to one of those I guess now they're called, you could call them like 4X adjacent, or what is it? Epic strategy? No. There's another word for it. It's a genre. A something strategy, like global strategy, world strategy. I forget what it's called. Massive strategy. The ones where like Paradox basically publishes way more than Koei these days. Like Koei is doing a lot of things, but Paradox publishes most of these things. They don't do Western style Eastern style ones though, so we're still secluded to Koei for most Eastern style historical war games. While Paradox has been publishing all the Western ones. Grand strategy. Thank you, Gecko. Grand strategy is the word. Yes, grand strategy 4X. Sometimes it's just grand strategy, sometimes it's 4X, but oftentimes now those games are bleeding together because they have to meet the content demands. So often it's a 4X grand strategy game. Yeah, I haven't played a grand strategy game in a long time. I think one that I've been considering for a while was Crusader Kings, published by Paradox. And then there's the hybrid type of grand strategy games like the Sega's Total War series, right? Was it Sega? Sega's publishing the Total War, right? Or is it someone else? Let me see. Kind of thought it was Games Workshop with Sega, right? Yes. Yeah. It's their other less like kind of decent collaboration with like Activision and all of them. Yeah, the Total War games. You didn't even play 2 or 3 was your first? I love the game even these days. I absolutely love 2. 2 was when they hit their modern stride. 2 was the title that like if everything after this, we've got it. We've nailed the thing. So I played a lot of first those, like the first of Transition. 1 was not was a really far cry from the modernization. 2 and everything post 2. Yeah. Oh, it's Musuo. Musuo is that last 2 letters, the last 2 characters. I'm like, what were these games called before? And it's like Musuo. Yeah, I remember now. That's what that those 2 characters were. You really like Crusader Kings 2 and 3? I say definitely has a somewhat different feel to other Paradox, more intimately maybe. Great to get to know in-game characters and watch stories unfold. Yeah. Yeah. The last like grand strategy game I played was Civilization 5. didn't keep up with it. And Civilization, the new Civilization is coming out soon, right? The new Civilization is coming out. I'm gonna say this month. It's either this month or next month. At the end of this month or next month or something very soon. Soon, TM. Actually, let me double check. Civ 7, right? I think they're on 7. Civ 7 next month. Wow, it's within a week. Within 2 weeks of February is a big month in 2025. Like next month is very big because after Civ drops, a little over a week, then Yakuza Pirate drops, and then within a week, Monster Hunter Wilds drops. So it's a big month for big ones. Yakuza Pirates, the Pirate Yakuza, it's big not in the terms of its budget or its like long waited thing. It's more the historical factor that the character you're playing and the game itself's core mechanics is something historically important that game comes out. So it's very important in that way. You just got Civ 7 as a Christmas present. Comes out on February 11th. Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah, so it's quite it's a big time. It's been a while since the last front runner legacy 4X game. 4X / grand strategy game has come out. I played my first Civilization game was Civ 2 as well. It seems like a lot of my first those that still have long legacies was their second iteration, you know, when they hunkered down and found their winning balance. I think Roller Coaster Tycoon was the same. Roller Coaster Tycoon was 2 as well. Sim City was either 2 or 3. Man, I have a lot of I played a lot of video games back in the day. You know, when video games were, if it's released, you buy it, like, because you don't know what you're getting back in the day, right? It's not like saturated. So it's such a different generational experience now where people could continue to play exactly very iterative similar games for the rest of their lives and not be interested in others. And then when you're back in an early generation, you played one-offs of all of the legacy archetypes before they become inundated with permutations of similar designs. You love Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Would you like a Dragon, or is it like something totally different? Never played the Yakuza franchise. Hard to say, because a lot of people's favorite part about Black Flag is the ships mechanic, and that's new to Like a Dragon. However, hear me out here. Like a Dragon series has been absolutely consistent in capturing an arcade nonsense version of very popular formats. Their thing that they do in Sega is they have a showcase side quests, a showcase side mini game within the, like, it's kind of like game within a game. So this, for Pirate Yakuza, it's the Black Flag thing. So most of the time it's if you want depth, like if Black Flag, your favorite thing about Black Flag was the depth of the ship's mechanic and whatnot, you're not going to get that. Sega's like main like front runner side mini game in their games are the most least managed core thing. So it's like if you refine Black Flag, they're probably gonna attempt to capture all the bells, the essence of Black Flag. However, it is still second to the core mechanic, which this game is the combat. I will be streaming it, yes. I streamed every single one of them, and I will continue to do that. So when it comes to mini games, in this case, the returning mini game from the previous game was the simulator, the base building. I think there's elements of that base building from the previous game. So they did a light version in the previous game, a light version of your casual sim game, your building base and like farm simulator game, like your Stardew Valley, right? So that was their previous game. So every single game has a showcase mainstream side quest. And if you like something and it looks like something, Sega will reduce it into the most streamlined version of it. So oftentimes I would say with a grain of salt that if you think this looks like that thing, think about a bite-sized version of it and only capturing the fun parts of it. But if you're looking for depth, the answer is you're probably going to have to go somewhere else. Largely because that's the side game. Like there's often at least one showcase mini game which tries to capture the essence of something that's very popular, and Sega in general in Like a Dragon has not missed on their mini game yet. You know, knock on wood, because they're taking the essence of the game. So it's not too long, it's not too depth, it's casual forward, right? So you're gonna expect like drifting arcadey ships as opposed to like the weight and then do your, you know, yeah. So the ships are gonna fly around. They're gonna be like driving Tokyo drift cars. I absolutely, like, there's gonna be, like, if you're thinking about physics and bouncing ships things, nah. These ships are gonna have thrusters, and like you're gonna have machine guns, or you're gonna have cannons that fire like machine guns, and you're gonna litter the screen with hundreds of cannonballs or something. They're gonna like absolutely send a nuke at each other or something like that. Something like a dragon, basically. Like, so it's one of the things to be expected in Like a Dragon. So it's gonna be fun. And then the combat, so this is the combat series of games. So if you dispense, you know, Assassin's Creed still has the combat stuff. So it's not that, it's more like a beat 'em up game. Your classic beat 'em up game. So that's one of the historical natures of Like a Dragon. This is not an RPG, not a turn-based RPG game, which usually features people from the Legacy series as opposed to Casca, which Casca's gang and stuff is the RPG role. But I'm gonna stream indefinitely. It's my dedicated yearly game. I hope I don't mind if they make it a yearly game, because I'll eat that stuff up. Like a Dragon is predicated on its characters, the legacy that connects together. But ultimately, Like a Dragon is a mini game collection. Like, as many arcadey versions of all modern things as you can. Usually lean more towards depth, complexity, realism in games, but I do enjoy silly too once in a while to balance it out. Its showcase is not that though. So its depth and complexity is storytelling. So realism is its depth, story, and storytelling. I think depth, complexity, and realism games tend to lose sight of storytelling. They sacrifice a lot in storytelling because generally the depth and complexity is focused on mechanics. And oftentimes when people think of depth and complexity, they're thinking about mechanics. And this game series is predicated on storytelling. So it's the characters doing the things that create the auto buy. And personally, it can be tough what my stance on is, because largely realism, in my opinion, is incredibly restrictive to creative freedom. So when you think of realism, I think realism is confining, and it destroys the liberties that video games have. It's kind of like expecting an animation, like an anime, to be realistic. The stuff that you think are realistic is not realistic, that people enjoy, right? I think depth, complexity, and realism are very very different things, but the whole realism thing, it's surprising what people think are realistic and aren't actually. Like, for example, bullet drop and bow dropping. That is something that is a mechanical thing, not a realistic thing. Like being able to. There are a lot of details, but I typically use the bullet drop and the bow thing as an example because it's something that a lot of people think things should drop at this particular distance, but it's not even close to realism. And depth and complexity is more of a mechanical thing. So someone who likes Civilization, right, and we're talking about like grand strategy games, that's probably depth and complexity. In terms of Like a Dragon, the depth and complexity is being able to explain the plot, the ongoing plot of the games. I mean, it's more like easy suspension of disbelief in the specific context of a show or game. Like a sci-fi story can feel realistic even though it's not close to reality. Like a sci-fi story can feel realistic even though it's not close to reality. A sci-fi story feels realistic because it is close to reality. I think an example, hear me out here. I think an example when you mean a sci-fi story can feel realistic even though it's not close to reality is that the characters behave in a believable way within a context that doesn't exist yet. That's a character behaving realistically. So, okay, I'll divide this specific context, right? The specific context could be the context of the world that maybe does not exist, or like how things function, and then there's realistic characters. And Like a Dragon has realistic characters, as in their hallmark is the realism of the characters, and it takes place in modern day, right? However, the suspension of disbelief is for mechanical reasons, right? Mechanical reasons. However, realism itself can be, as I would stand again, confine the nature of character designs, right? Characters do not specifically feel realistic if you're running the gambit of being it relatable. So what is considered realistic is, I guess what you're saying is storytelling, which grand strategy games often do not. Of course, you could say Crusader Kings. That's why probably you're relating to Crusader games on the story front. But I don't want to give you the impression that a game that has a lack of depth and complexity does not have realism, and those things were lumped together. So I couldn't really discern that. That's a long list. They're not interchangeable. Depth, complexity, and realism are not like interchangeable, right? So here in this case, Like a Dragon's most dominant case is its storytelling, which is a mix of not realistic and realistic. The realism is that these characters exist. And the more you know about them, the more realistic they become. However, they might not be realistic because they're Japanese characters, for example. And it would be interesting to see someone's perspective on having, right, having a preference towards depth, complexity, and realism, largely due to the nature that realism is it's not the same as depth and complexity. I don't know. I'm talking circles here, but I am struggling to find something that would have those three. Yeah, no, I'll have to think about it. That's a really loaded statement, but yes, it would be. Do you have a game example that has depth, complexity, and realism? Because silly, it can be realistic. Reality is complex and deep, I guess. Like, because silly is not a counter to realism. People do silly things realistically, and then like silly things have complexity. Humorous things have complexity, and the reason why I say that is because Like a Dragon is depth, complexity, and realism. Largely on the side is because it's silly. It's celebrating life and being silly in life and doing things eccentrically, right? So yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting thought. It's a big statement. It's a loaded statement. A sci-fi story can be realistic even though it's not close to reality. I agree because of the context of the character. However, it can also be realistic in that it is a complex extension of what may happen in the future. Last of Us 1 and 2, RDR2, definitely not silly though. They are. Are they not silly? They are pretty silly actually, but that might be because I have a science background. Last of Us 1 and 2 is pretty dang silly. It's like watching Walking Dead. The Walking Dead. The characters behave quite silly, but it might not be silly for the drama situation. RDR2, oh man, that's really silly. Unless you're not a fan of like Clint Eastwood stuff and whatnot. But there are elements, obviously those games are really big, so there are silly elements and then there are not silly elements. But the way the characters are dramatized, it's often a dramatization, so there's some suspense of disbelief in it. I think the context, like the world itself, is probably more realistic than the characters themselves. Although that's perfectly fine. It's, you know, Rockstar Games and Naughty Dog doing Last of Us, their characters are larger than life. And then RDR2, the character is larger than life, as opposed to something not larger, like, you know, that guy in RDR2, he'd be dead in like 3 days. Right? Like, if we're talking about realism and whatnot, the decisions this guy make, that dude is like ex machina embodiment. Last of Us 1 is ex machina embodiment. So that's like a dragon. Like a dragon's characters are larger than life. The thing that makes them so memorable and eccentric is that they have plot armor. They have effective plot armor that you have to suspend your disbelief entirely over and over again, right? Due to their decision making. I would say even The Walking Dead has more dead characters than Last of Us and RDR2. Real talk. Just real talk about the whole realistic thing. Yeah. I haven't played RDR2 myself. It took me, I watch people play, and the way that person makes his decisions is what makes him really fantastic, because he is fantastically unrealistic. The things you're able to make your character do and they get away, he ex machinas his way out of most things. I don't know if you've seen Deus Ex Machina, where that meme came from. Ex Machina means like things just work out so conveniently that this person didn't end up in a ditch over and over again. And that's what makes those dramatizations incredibly emotional. They're character-driven novellas. In a way, Crusader Kings, I would say, is very similar because you follow specific characters. They don't immediately die at each corner, because they're in a war game. I think realism is a little bit overrated in a sense that if you want character drama, it's very difficult to suspend your disbelief far enough that you would enjoy it, because if it's realistic, your characters would have died so many times prior. There's only so much plot armor to prevent realistic characters or realism from killing off your characters. Like, I don't know, the first season of Game of Thrones, for example, where, sorry, I might be spoiling a old show, but an even older book series, but when Ned Stark gets executed, right? That is probably the closest thing to quote unquote realism when it comes to character consequences than, say, RDR2's protagonist, right? Like Geralt of Rivia from Witcher. That is a little bit more realistic, largely because The Witcher has a long history of demonstrating that they have survived lots of these encounters. I guess you could suspend the disbelief that the RDR2 character somehow is incredibly perceptive, consistently lucky, and also magically skilled in everything that person does. And then also like Last of Us characters. Alternatively, for example, Kratos' character is, you might be thinking, oh, it's mythological, it's not like this person would have died a long time ago because he's just human, but he's not just human. So in fact, the unrealistic context of his lore makes him more realistic because he can't die. He was blessed by gods. He's a demigod himself, and then so forth and so on. So it's like realistic. The character is realistic, bound by the unrealistic context of its situation. I think I'm being a little bit pedantic, but it's my counter argument on it's my counter argument for the whole idea of sometimes people differ in their perspective on what realistic is supposed to be. It's not story driven, but my favorite FPS, for example, is Red Orchestra 2. The wartime game. Yes. You catch a bullet and you're dead, but then you respawn, suspension, delete. Otherwise, it would be a pretty short game. No, not really. If you get shot in the head, you take the role of a different character. Call of Duty kind of sort of did that in their storyline, where like multiple times where you play a character and that character gets killed, and then you play a different character because that's what happens in war. Your character dies. Like one of the biggest what faces oftentimes deal with the execution of a beloved character or the betrayal of two characters to each other that you played, but then you play a different character. So in Red Orchestra, they, for the sake of realism, instead of suspending disbelief, you could catch a bullet and die and then take the role of a different character as opposed to respawning your initial character. There are a couple games like that where when you die, you immediately like flow like zoom out of the battlefield, and then they will tell you where your other character is. I think Battlefield did that for one of its things. Maybe Battlefield 1, like the reboot, the old time reboot or something. So they could have went that direction. However, you can choose to suspend your disbelief to respawn as the character that you pick. What's a example of this? Roguelike games? Roguelike games typically have to find some non-story driven mechanic in explaining why your character comes back to life. And that the context of the environment is unrealistic. However, if you understand the context of the environment, then your character behaves realistically within the rules of that world. For example, Dead Cell. Dead Cell is a Metroidvania game. It's not brimming with story-driven things, but it is explained how the character dies and spawns back from the pool. Or Hades from Supergiant Games, where your character is a god or a demigod, and every time you die, you spawn back to the proverbial purgatory that is the underworld, right? And then with every iteration, within the context of their time moving forward while respawning, they progress the story in a nature that is realistic within the context of their game. So these games are cool. I personally have a preference for these type of games, and I think that's where we both meet eye to eye, where like it's realistic in the sense that within the context or confine of the system, you don't necessarily have to suspend your disbelief beyond understanding the rules of the world or the fictional world that you have already paid, bought a ticket into. I think that's probably where we're going with this. I think that's the closest thing I can empathize with you, where when you said like a sci-fi story can feel realistic even though it's not close to reality, like Alter Carbon, for example, where you have to suspend your disbelief initially that human consciousness can be stored as a stack with the invention of the stack on the spinal column, right? And that allows effective conscious immortality and allow people to exchange their mortality, go beyond their mortal body by preserving the stack, but the essence of themselves in these, like, I think it's called a stack. Basically, you upload yourself to these things, and then due to the confines of that, everything else behaves realistically. Because if you have these things, what is immortality like? Are the humans going to behave? And for me, I think Last of Us is fantastically whimsy. Like, knowing these circumstances, they behave, in my opinion, startlingly not realistically. And then RDR2, it's a Rockstar game. Your characters tend to not behave realistically within the context of their world. It's kind of like Rockstar's hallmark. You play a character that's larger than life, as opposed to trying to make the character something realistic. I actually think that's why I enjoy watching Rockstar games, because their characters are larger than life. I like a Dragon because the characters are larger than life. Casca, dude, I love Casca, but holy heck, Casca is like a saint. Like, and that's why I really like it. Kiryu is Superman. Like, he's the most he's Superman character. So it's difficult to quite. You still wouldn't call Last of Us silly though. I do, because of the whole science thing. Like, people interacting with violent post-apocalyptic things. Generally, I think Last of Us is like it's shy of The Walking Dead, which I guess I did watch all of it, didn't I? The full, just the Walking Dead, not like all the spin-offs. Although maybe realistic is not the word either. It's grandiose. Last of Us is filled with melodrama. It's incredibly melodramatic. The actions you make, the choices you make, exceptional kids, all their main characters are absolutely exceptional. They are far from average characters, and they ex machina everything. Like, there's no consequences except for the one pivotal. Sorry if I'm spoiling Last of Us, but except for the one pivotal consequence. I think Telltale Games is the Walking Dead series is would be what Last of Us would look like if Last of Us had realistic characters and not larger than life plotted armor characters. I think it's one of the things that make Last of Us brilliant and fantastic. It isn't Telltale Games is The Walking Dead. If it ended up being the Telltale Games The Walking Dead, I don't know if it would have been as great, like as different. I don't know if you ever played Telltale Games' The Walking Dead series. Generally speaking, yeah, you don't get attached to your characters because decisions are made in a post-apocalyptic world. Maybe we simply don't have the same interpretation of meaning of silly. I'll blame it on the language barrier. No, I think, hear me out. I know what you're thinking about that's silly. However, I find more things silly than being goofy and being for humor. I think silly is also the way I read the way you said silly is the opposite of realism. So, like, you said you usually lean more towards depth, complexity, realism in games, but you do enjoy silly too once in a while. So there are a lot of things that opposites realism, depth, and complexity. There's mechanical arcadeness, right? It suspends like physical boundaries and stuff, like, oh, a ship drifting. That's silly, right? Because ships don't drift, for example. You don't fire a nuke from a 19th century ship. That's silly. That's a depth mechanics thing, right? And then you had realism, which you're using to contrast with silly. So there are many versions of silly, and I'm talking about a particular form of silly that contrasts with your example of Last of Us RDR2, right? Not that I'm saying the game itself has silly characters, like as in they're goofy or funny or Saints Row, right? Like, it's not Saints Row. Rockstar Games don't make games like Saints Row. RDR2 is not a Saints Row like game. Rip in pieces, right? Rest in peace, Saints Row. Like, they're not being goofy. To me, silly mostly equates to goofy in a way, you guess. Yeah, so I think the word would be funny, I suppose, in my opinion. Things are very silly because people make silly choices, right? And Last of Us, the characters make incredibly silly choices. They're not funny choices, but they are certainly silly, as in foolish. They are foolish choice making. And that foolish choice making does not produce any consequences. It's kind of like my talk or argument. This isn't an argument. This is differing perspective, obviously. It's one of those things where when someone says to me, "Oh yeah, Marvel comics, they try to be as realistic as possible," right? This is a comment. Now, I can defend that and refute that. I can defend it because Marvel in its context tries to be as realistic as possible within the confines of their system. So if someone were to have, say, this ability, how do we explain and how do we contextualize the consequences of this ability, right? Like Spider-Man, for example. However, the choices the characters make can oftentimes be incredibly silly, like incredibly foolish, incredibly foolhardy, even within the confines of their system. Like, I guess I would say something like Ultron or something. You know, Ultron has their infinite wisdom and the collective knowledge of all that is, and then what did he choose, right? Or what did it choose and whatnot, and that can be very hard to determine if that's a foolish decision or not. I think anime plays to that quite a lot, where the world can be incredibly, like Attack on Titans. Oh yeah, we were talking about Attack on Titans yesterday. Yeah, Attack on Titans. Like, I'm watching the last. I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, but I'm watching a part where now it's becoming silly as opposed to realistic, like concordant with their character. So for the dramatization series, you have like a potentially a leap of logic in which these characters behave in a manner like, this is definitely anime I'm watching. I don't want to talk more about it in case people haven't. Okay, here's a slight spoiler. I don't know. Attack on Titan's about 4 years, right? I think we're okay with this. You know how Eren suddenly has a 3-year. They're trying to explain Eren's sudden motivations for his 3-year sudden 180 flip, like subversion choices. I guess you do associate silly more with funny than with foolish. I was not joking when I mentioned the language barrier issue on this one, though. I don't know if that's just a wrong interpretation from you. I don't think so. I mean, I know what silly fun is as well, for sure. Like a Dragon, like for example, Like a Dragon is silly fun in its arcade mechanics, like in its complexity and depth is silly. However, the characters themselves are often not. They're silly in the sense that they're incredibly melodramatic. They're melodramatic, and they make decisions that are a bit bonkers. A lot of times, like for example, Kiryu. Can't tell you how many times Kiryu was like, all right, I gotta solve this problem. How does he solve the problem? He decides that the best course of action is it's all on him. It's his responsibility. So he decides to walk up this 100 floor building and beat up every single person. Barehanded. All the way up, and he survives. And that's silly because it's funny. Like, it's funny, but also very, very serious. Like, it's realistic for his character to do that because his character believes that he is the righteous person. He is always right, like in his intent. So it is his will that allows him to accomplish these feats. And Last of Us is those are the types of characters that you have. And then when you lose a character, it becomes all that more weighty. Meanwhile, you have war films, right? Like war films, the character you have might not even stay on the screen for more than 10 minutes. Largely due to the nature that those characters, if they make silly decisions or foolish or weird, awkward decisions, they largely no longer persist in a realistic world. Although I still think you need some of that. You need, often it's a balance, right? It's a balance between the two. Like Band of Brothers, the series Band of Brothers, they're going to have characters that they're not long for this world, kind of thing. It's funny. I like this discussion. Foolish, funny. I'll have to reevaluate. The reason I'm so involved right now in this discussion is largely because one of my genre of choice is often sci-fi. Largely due to dealing with hypotheticals, right? And the hypotheticals, the conversation of realism comes into play all the time, largely due to the idea that's science fiction. And Last of Us is science fiction, right? RDR2, not so much, right? RDR2, not so much. However, we, I guess historically, if RDR2 was patterned after your legendary people, you could see it as, oh, this is an exception. This person is extraordinary, and we do have extraordinary people in past, in history, that done this, like the kid or something. You know, there are movies about the kid all the time, and they're wonderful portrayals like Clint Eastwood and whatnot often refer to those things. But those are like, oh yeah, this has happened before, so that's realistic. It's realistically possible. Meanwhile, Last of Us is science fiction, and the way they approach or find things and the world they paint is often for dramatic effect, as opposed to this is my personal bias. I love watching these. I actually love watching Last of Us largely because it's unrealistic, not because it is realistic. You know, whenever I hang around with some of my colleagues, they're like, dude, why are doctors and scientists always the mad scientists? That's my personal take on things. Like, why is the scientist so like dumb? That kind of thing. And the words would be used like, why do they do this? Like Sweet Tooth. Oh man. I enjoyed it. But holy heck. I think the doctor is the people who are educated, the scientists and the doctors and stuff, they are silly characters. They do the most wildly, like, it's so interesting, but at the same time, like, since it's science fiction, you could say, oh, it's believable, you know, because it's science fiction. You don't know what would actually happen if a contagion happens, right? And usually most of these like zombie related things are contagion related things. Reminds me of Vinland Saga. The setting is overly very realistic, but it also embraces the the legend aspect. Yep, exactly, like a Kratos situation and whatnot, like the God of War series and whatnot. And I actually love when games are a balance of both. But yeah, this is definitely worth investing. We'll be talking about this far more when we're playing video games. Like anime, this type of discussion happens, in my opinion, when you get really into anime. Anime happens, this type of discussions all over the place, largely because anime characters can be both silly in the haha way and silly in the what the heck are they thinking? Like, what? That can't be the only choice. Like, I'm sorry, I'm like stuck on Attack on Titan because I'm trying to like finish Attack on Titan. It's like, what? That can't. Dramatic effect. The season 4 is, whew, season 4 is like, whoa. Like at first, you know, the first 3 seasons was like, okay, I see. Oh man, that's gonna be bad. That's gonna be so brutal. And then fast forward 3 years is like, okay, all right. I'm gonna have to hop on this boat. That's these are the decisions they made. I'm like, all right, that's fine, I suppose. And so you gotta play it along, like, because so many of these characters have suddenly, the pivotal characters and whatnot have suddenly have a change of heart, and you're trying to believe that through the characterization of like a few flashbacks. It is really epic though. It is incredibly epic, which brings in the saga and legends aspect. So like anime has this wonderful trend, right? We're learning Japanese. Anime's got to be in the discussion, right? When you have anime, there are so many ones where I like this world. It's very realistic. It's basically high school, right? How many times have you said that? It's basically high school. Wow, these kids are really going through trouble. And then it happens. And then it's no longer. However, then you are like, okay, I'm going to suspend the disbelief that these kids behave like 21-year-olds who have like 60 years of experience and have the perceptions of an omnipotent demigod. I'm like, okay, I got it. Okay, now everything else is realistic. Knowing that they have these things, knowing that these characters are these things. I can't. I don't think I know of a show or a video game or show or a like television series or something that takes place of an average person. Do I? Like they follow through so hard that it made it compelling. I'm not entirely. The closest thing I have is modern life. So there's a genre, in my opinion, a subgenre of Western indie films. A Western indie film that's it's a modern life indie film. So these characters are typically not larger than life. They tend to overcome things that are of modern society. Like there is a little bit of gag and whimsical in it, but generally speaking, those characters are incredibly quote unquote realistic, and usually those are modern life situations. So like one that I would the one that I have recently watched, The Holdovers. The Holdovers would be something like there's like 10% of whimsiness and then the rest is a modern life. It doesn't leave you great. It doesn't leave you feeling great, like awesome. You don't have a character that you fully suspend your disbelief that like they're not, like there's noise in their personality and whatnot, but they don't hit like Last of Us. They don't typically hit like RDR2. Video game characters, I still have yet to encounter a game that isn't lore based, isn't context lore based, that the characters themselves that you play, the roles of the characters themselves represent the realism, or like the realism that one would want to desire. They're usually larger than life characters if it's a character driven thing. However, strategy games dispense with storytelling altogether, largely because maybe not Crusader King, but story-based stuff largely because it's antagonistic. When you have larger than life character, in order to become attached to characters or character-driven novella, your characters have to be larger than life in general speaking. When that happens, that does not diminish your enjoyment of the show or game. No, it doesn't. It's like at least in my opinion, I want to become attached to a character, then I would understand that they would have to take liberties of suspending disbelief. The more attachment to a character that you have, the more likely you're going to have that psychological predisposition to rationalize all of the character's responses. As you step back out, you realize that, man, this character is ridiculously lucky most of the time, because all of these things have to work out. Now, hear me out. That doesn't mean they can't happen, right? Like movies based on, what was that movie called? 38 Days? Was it called 38 Days? Oh, 300. No, not 300. What was the based on a true story? So the based on a true story things are those characters. It is possible, right? When someone says, is it realistic? They really mean, in my opinion, is it possible? And certainly almost all of these things you could argue is possible if it happened. So you have like movies where that guy who was trapped in the ledge or the boulder or something for a specific amount of days and he lived, right? The question is, yes, it is possible. Now, is it realistic? So anime has to answer this question most of the time, right? Certainly it is possible for someone to be so lucky, for example, in RDR2, this is not anime, sorry, we're going back and forth. RDR2, certainly there's got to be someone out there who has lived through all the choices made in RDR2, and therefore you could say, since it is possible, it's realistic, right? And this is where I make the suspension of disbelief most of the time. Largely because I like experiencing things from a lens that is from somewhere else. So rarely does for me personally, right? When that happens, noticing these unexplainable character moments, you try to explain them. I mean, or at least I try to explain. I guess we should be glad that all these incredible dramatic stories are not representations of our life in reality. Yes. And no at the same time. You know what I mean, Gecko? Like, hear me out here. Hear me out. This is a big hot take. At what point do exposure, I'm gonna talk about mental health again and mindset. At what point does exposure to these dramatizations would one start to believe that certain things that are realistic because they're possible. So like, if a zombie apocalypse happens and you do these things, is it realistic because it's possible, or is it realistic, or is it not realistic because this person is special? It's a cruel reality. It's a cruel reality. One anecdote, if you can call it that stuck with you is in the movie Schindler's List. Yes, they toned down some of the actual violence and cruelty because they thought people would find them unrealistic. Yes, but that, yeah, you see what I mean? Like, it's such an interesting thought. That's a good example. That's the reverse example, right? So like the cruelties, right? The cruelties that humans are capable of, right? Actually, Schindler's List isn't the only. Oh man. There was one. Oh man. I forgot what the game was. Yeah, it really is. It's all about the expectation ability to project. Now, it's also, well, it's a lot driven by that. I think before it, ahead, like even before the expectations and ability to project, is exposure. Exposure to like information, right? So if you keep seeing a car explode, do you think it's realistic? I assure you, there is. I'm not going to use a percentage. There's a significant number of people that believe cars explode from a fire. Like, car exploding, car plus fire explodes. Most of the time. Conservatively, that's not true. Not most of the time. That doesn't happen, right? Or like anything with gunfire. Maybe like structural integrity of buildings. And then in terms of character development, right? I think, in my opinion, yeah, all the Hollywood tropes, man. Like 2 seconds of exposure to chloroform. Oh my gosh, that struggle would be so much longer. Like, and it would be cruel, in my opinion. It's like not, you know. Here's my opinion. On something that's interesting about Schindler's List. And maybe let's also talk about anime, right? Sometimes realism is portrayed by the range. This is This is like a working theory, right? A working theory. I've been saving this for a while for video games when we go back to playing video games, but we'll talk about it here. Realism is often related to the range of exposure. So if your movie has this range of, let's say, intensity, I don't know, you can imagine anything. You can put anything in here, like love, sadness, sorrow, violence, etc. If this is the range, right, and this is the expectation of realism, then a movie that has a larger range than your expected realism would then end up being unrealistic. And often this is like a 1 and a 2, a 1 or a 1 and a 0 often. Not talking from personal experience, by the way. It's fair. It's fair. The 2-second exposure to chloroform. So here's one that's also interesting. So if a character, like for example, if a character, and I'm guilty of this, if a character behaves within the range of realism, as in like once you suspend your disbelief of whatever context this character has, and then they behave within a range of their decision making, then it continues to be realistic. However, the moment they make a decision that is outside the range of this, they no longer become a realistic character, right? They suddenly become larger than life. And what's interesting about this type of thing is it could be all of this range can be in the context of something incredibly unrealistic. And that's kind of how I feel about when people talk about their preference in realism, right? And I like that you put realism in quotes, where it's the nature that either the context or the character does not violate or go way off the handles. So RDR2, and here's where I'm going to capture RDR2's realism. You have come to expect that the main character does certain things. And when they do certain things, they can be realistic, they can feel realistic within the game. But the moment you step out of the game, you realize that the character is larger than life. And to me, that's my consensus of how I totally understand how people think RDR2 is realistic. Because if you're in the game, the main character behaves very according to that. Yes, and now we're also back at how Like a Dragon might feel realistic. Yeah. Casca's absurd. Hear me out. Casca is a living modern saint. he gets betrayed like 9 times over in a matter of 1 year of his life, and he is not traumatized. He is not in the corner, huddled in a fetal position or dead in a ditch somewhere. However, when you follow Casca's decision makings and all that stuff, they kind of make sense because it's within his character. Like Casca took like several bullets and like leaped out of burning cars and stuff, but hear me out. All the decisions he made is really like him. And then Kiryu would punch anything that disagrees with him. And the moment you think about it, when you step out, it's like, okay, a character that punches everyone when they disagree with their righteous principles, that person is not long for this world. Like, if you step out, it's like, oh yeah, Kiryu is a very reasonable, realistic character. And then you step down, it's like, wait a minute, he just punches and grumbles at people who disagrees with him all the time. Like, is that a realistic human being? Well, I like to believe that most human beings are not like that. So they're incredibly... And then I think, what's the Last of Us main character? Or the first Last of Us main character? What was his name? Joel. The decisions that Joel make, absolutely. Like, oh yeah, this is his character. And then you start thinking, if we took a poll of how many people would make those decisions in those way, very, very lucky. Or even better, Drake from Uncharted. Naughty Dog's special, right? Drake from... Wait, is that his name? I hope that's his name. Wait, what was Uncharted's main character? He went by Drake, right? Yeah, Nathan Drake. Sorry, Nathan. Yeah, Nathan Drake. It's a good talk. It's a good talk. Like here this is also funny, right? Let's one last thing. We'll think about realistic people, right? Do you think Gandhi, like the people in Civ games, right? Do you think these people are quote unquote realistic people? So like Alexander the Great. Nero. I don't know. I'm naming like very obvious ones. Napoleon. So the question is, do you think these people are realistic people? I have asked myself this time and time again. Like, if what is possible makes something realistic. And I think to me, it's even more of a, it's not only an English, like a language barrier thing, it also deals with like the psychological perceptions. And we're going to encounter this all the time, Gecko. You and I, I can see myself, you and I, we're going to have long discussions teasing apart like a case by case, because these people are real. They're real people, right? And oftentimes when people think about realistic, they're not talking about extraordinary people. And then there's the other group, a larger other group, is if it's possible, then it's clearly realistic. So like shooting an arrow, 1 in 1,000 chance that it's going to hit something. Is that realistic? Because it is possible. That person could, at that one time, at that very moment, shot an arrow in a 1 in 1,000 odds, hit the fuel tanker of a helicopter going like 100 miles per hour in one direction. It is possible. Now, the question is that realistic? I love this question because it brings up Ex Machina. Right? what are the odds that Legolas can skip around multiple barrels while on a river rapid while also having the dexterity to shoot accurately with a bow and arrow. and why would you do that? So in what case did Legolas decide the most accurate way, to the most reasonable way, is to skip around on multiple barrels that are in a river that's rapidly moving around while trying to shoot an arrow? Shoot an arrow from his bow. Like that's kind of the thing. I'm thinking of a very specific scene. He doesn't actually shoot an arrow, but I'm thinking about like the later Hobbit trilogy, where people pandered at Peter Jackson's overzealous use of set pieces, and then those set pieces are quote unquote too fancy, too extraordinary, right? And obviously this is a fantasy movie, but at the same time it became too fancy. At least I've never perceived the Civ leaders as very realistic. I have not. I actually think they're incredibly extraordinary people, right? I don't want to make myself sound like I'm a defeatist about my own personal importance, but video games, even historical video games and wartime video games and film and movie, they have an element. And that element, when it comes to the characters, are that these characters are extraordinary. And these extraordinary characters can behave realistically within the context of their situation. However, they can make outrageous decisions if you step out of the context of the video game or the movie. And honestly, I'm okay with that. With real historical, they also usually get highly romanticized by the oral and written stories told about them. Yeah, they become larger than life. They're legends, especially in the general population person. Not talking about proper historian, possibly. Yeah, and then you have like the cynicism flow in the back of your head, right? The victors write the history, right? Nowadays, let's think about this. Think about it here. I got a really, really good one last digression, because I love this topic. I absolutely love this topic, and it comes with anime in general, like where anime is inspired, right? Nowadays, we live in the post-internet age, right? Now think about the post-internet age. Now we have a realistic portrayal of extraordinary people, or what is seen behind the lens, right? And has that changed at all? Has that changed at all now that the vast majority of people online are exposed to a really large chunk of realistic portrayal, or avenue of realistic portrayal of the anybody? So now you have hundreds and millions of sample sizes of people being less extraordinary, yet when you see the perceptions, they're often still extraordinary cases. So now you're thinking, well, now what does the general population believe? Do you think kids think that it's not realistic for a person to make millions of dollars, spend millions of dollars, and continue to do it? And then you're wondering, how does this relate to Japanese stuff and learning Japanese? Well, let's think about what is a realistic interaction when you're constantly being exposed to Japanese culture or extension of Japanese culture and the language? Do you think that someone is going to go up and say, kawaii desu ne? Over and over again? Or do you think it's like, oh, hai, sugoi desu. Like, what? This goes way past now. Now we are having this discussion about what is a realistic interaction when, quote unquote, I'm going to use the language learning buzzword. What's a natural interaction using Japanese? Well, some people might think, oh, obviously, a natural interaction is a Japanese person talking to a Japanese person. That is definitely the normal way. I'm being a hot topic right now. Sorry, I know I'm gonna get some flame in the future for this. I don't think I'm gonna stand down from this stance, but when you're thinking natural, what is the natural environment that you're gonna interact with, right? The idea is, oh yeah, you gotta learn from Japanese talking to Japanese. Like, here's two Japanese people talking to each other. That's what I imagine. My Japanese has to be like this. This is the natural way of interacting with Japanese. Meanwhile, my first thought is, if I'm going to use that as my point of reference, where am I in the equation? Like, is this normalizing the idea that your expectation is somehow, as a non-Japanese person, you somehow magically became a Japanese person, and therefore, when you think about what your interaction is going to be like with Japanese people, you have normalized that you're going to sound like a Japanese person who lives and breathes and is a Japanese person talking to another Japanese person. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't watch these things and know how Japanese people interact with Japanese people. I'm talking about you also need to know how a non-Japanese person interact with a Japanese person, or a language learner interacting with a Japanese person. When you predicate your entire exposure and expectations based on idealism and romanticization, it's gonna throw you into the unrealistic territory, quote unquote, the unrealistic territory. And now we brought it back full circle to language learning. How is this relevant to language learning? The perception of realism, right? I have no doubt in my mind that if I see a Japanese person talking to another Japanese person, my situation is different because I'm not a Japanese person. So there's this whole idea of natural interactions. The natural interaction for me is I'm an English speaker talking to possibly other Japanese people, but usually the realistic outcome is I'm talking to another language learner. So I focus a lot of my efforts in this situation prior to the rare situation in which I can talk to a Japanese person. And that helps me normalize what my usual experience is, not my ideal experience or expectations. So I think it's incredibly important to have both of these exposures, largely due to the nature that if you keep thinking that you're a Japanese person, that you're going to talk to another Japanese person, and you spend years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years thinking this is your ideal case, you lose sight of all the other things that make this realistic. The realistic outcome is that you're a language learner, and there are lots of other language learners. Understanding that natural environment, because that's the most realistic and natural environment that's going to occur, having an under appreciation for this, largely because you expected this, is cognitive dissonance. It's a practice in cognitive dissonance. Oh yeah, also like when people aspire to other people's life. Yes, displayed on social media. Exactly. Influence, not realizing is usually not a representative sample of their people's lives. Exactly. And they won't share that. They can choose not to share that. I have tried to share some things that are, that people might forget. I try to be cognizant of this, right? Like, for example, you don't see me eat. I know this sounds like a joke sometimes, but I truly spend time and tell them, hey, if you want to talk about food, we can talk about food, because it's clearly showed that I don't eat, but you don't see me eat. You don't see me sleep. You don't see how I sleep. You don't see the problems that I cope with that I'm not sharing because they're not happening yet. So it's not like deliberately or intentionally withholding things. The things that are happening in the moment might not come up, right? Like there's no. I try to hand over fists integrate some of this stuff into the stream process, like what we're talking right now is a part of me that is outside of the stream. However, I make it related to the things that I stream, but it takes a while. It takes a while to integrate these things, right? And not everyone has time. It's not part of their content. They don't have to do this. They're not like obligated to give you the skippy on what's the importance of derailing on realism and gaming and movies and how that relates to my interest in language learning, right? You don't have to get that deep, obviously, because social media, short formats and whatnot. Going back to language learning, because watching you has been helping me refresh all these items, which I burned on WaniKani a while ago, I actually decided to get back on WaniKani, which I only toyed with in the past. Ooh. I wonder what that's like starting from scratch. Not that I had much after indirectly reviewing the items with you on, like, I feel like it's the perfect time for you to start reviewing them the other way around. You're gonna have to tell me how that feels. Hear me out. I don't know if WaniKani is ever gonna get an update. Oh, Kaniwani. Sorry, Kaniwani. Yeah. Oh, the other way. Yeah, Kaniwani. Sorry. Hear me out here. I go back to things whenever I can think of another way to consume it. So, Kaniwani would be a great example. Now, for Duolingo, I have often had the aspiration to go back and learn English using my target language. So, that's kind of like Kaniwani. So in Duolingo, you can switch your speaking language and then you can reverse the role, right? Which that has been on my to-do list for a while now, right? So absolutely, like experiencing them through like a different lens, and that's pretty neat. I'm gonna have to consider. I forgot that. Yeah, somebody already mentioned Kaniwani to me. And there's also other ways to experience this. For example, I read more forums. I read the community tab each day before WaniKani. And one of the topics was someone said they recommend that the only way to use WaniKani is Anki mode. And my first thought immediately was both? Like, why only WaniKani Anki mode? Are you an Anki user? So why not experience the WaniKani thing without it? There are a lot of questions, but the idea is this person said, well, this is the, I'm gonna use a different word. This is the realistic way of becoming fluent in Japanese faster, right? They didn't use this word. They said something like, this is the best way. And I'm being kind, in my opinion, because best is usually not realistic. But I think when they say it's the best way, they are talking about it's the most realistic way they can think of becoming fluent in Japanese. I'm playing around with words because the days that we live in now goes back to video games. It does go back to video games. It goes back to video games, movies, like books. Maybe less so books because there's still a quite eclectic way of books writing. But movies and video games, when they're portraying realistic things, you and I, obviously, we also have differing perceptions of realism or realistic, and these things create expectations. Right? These things create expectations, whether they're realistic or not. To me, that's exposure. It's mere exposure, the power of mere exposure. If you see it enough, then clearly it's true. YouTube. If you see it enough, it's clearly true. I know that's a joke, but it's very topical, right? So if you're exposed enough, you think it's true, or it's realistic. So what is realistic about language learning? When you learn Japanese, your goal is to be Japanese, right? If you're learning Japanese, you have to be Japanese. Best is often mistakenly used or perceived at most time efficient. I'm guilty of this myself. Hear me out. Best, I'll go even further, a little bit even further. Best is also perceived, what you said, right? Perceived as most. We're not going to even say efficient. We're just, most time efficient. We're going to say it's even generalized to most efficient, however way it is. So I'm giving more leeway, right? Time would be a cheap shot, like a low-hanging fruit. I feel like other people have a bigger perception than time, even like maybe effort, difficulty. So oftentimes when someone says best, it might be it's the least difficult way of achieving the results, or the least effort required to achieving a result, right? It's the easiest way to become fluent in Japanese. It's the best way. And so I'll give more leeway for this. Now hear me out. I have one on top of that. At the time. This is something, in my opinion, more than 50% people forget to qualify. As in, they don't mention it. This is the best way to do something at the time, at a very specific time point. Why is this important? Well, when you say WaniKani is best, my first question is when. I could ask like who said so, or according to who, but usually this is pretty well informed. People collect enough names to back them up. Nowadays, it's when someone says something is the best, I ask when. Largely due to the nature that I would say over 50% of the time, it's a moot point, or it's out of time and place, out of time and space. So, for example, you go up to someone and they spent, I don't know, someone's going to say, this is 150 days, right? In WaniKani. You go up and you're like, oh, this is the best way for someone who spent 150 days. Hear me out? It's like threefold problematic of this. Not only do they not consider the idea that someone has spent 150 days, they just say this is the best way because of your own experience. So your own experience back in the day when you were learning. So no, like a lot of times when they say best way, they don't mention this. They don't consider this, and they don't consider that this person's 150 days is a point in time that is different from theirs. So time gets lost all the time, with the lack of a better word. When you think of time, time is not encapsulated, and it doesn't help that YouTube, video games, movies, oftentimes, for the lack of a better word, warp the passage of time. So you think to yourself, okay, so how does this relate to WaniKani? How much time do you think can someone reasonably look at someone, use WaniKani, and appreciate what time is like for them? Or are you going to base all your things on exactly one screenshot and then assume something? Right? So oftentimes time is ignored. And I don't think there's a format. There's a very trendy format that can illustrate how time works from a perception standpoint. You can argue, well, objectively, time clearly moves in one direction and it never changes. Well, okay, I give you that, like based on this fact. All right. Now, what changes with time? Literally everything else. Not really. I'm kidding. It's like almost everything else changes with time. So when you're saying, oh yeah, so time will always move forward. So if it's bad now, it's got to be worse later. It's like, no, that's not the logic. That's called a leap of logic. If you make the mistake now, and you don't correct it right away, it's obviously going to get worse later. Language learner. Right here. Classic language learner. If you make a mistake now, it's obviously going to get worse later. Despite having high English proficiency and more than decent pronunciation accent to not immediately stand out, I have not felt American once in America. I don't expect any different when you go to Japan. Absolutely. I don't even, like, here's my deep cut, my personal share. I love that share, by the way. Here's my deep cut about feeling American. I'm in ABC, right? There are times when I feel American, and there are times when I don't feel American. and sometimes I have control. Sometimes I have control. And sometimes I don't. Sometimes I feel like I'm Chinese. And sometimes I'm not Chinese. And it goes back to feeling like I have or I have not. So And this is a state that I stay in my entire life, right? This is my entire life. So my perspective can't meet any other person's perspective when they identify with one thing. And that also means all my friends who decided to stay my friends or stay my best friends also have this feeling, in my opinion, because it would be lots of effort to try to empathize with this. So I have very few friends, right? But those friends are how do I dare say it? My friends are extraordinary people. But they are extraordinary in a way that may not matter to other people. So realistically, can you feel like neither of your things? If you are diaspora from a country, right? Your parents are the first gen. If you're a second gen in another country, you are effectively in the minority of people. In like modern day situations, there are more people who are associated multi-generationally with a singular identity from, born to older. And there are even people who are in my situation which decide to reject one side in order to join the greater 50%. I'm basically just saying minority and majority. I don't actually know the percentage. However, I would wager that more people would want to identify with one particular group as opposed to another. And that relates back to the idealism that when you're learning Japanese, you have to be Japanese in order to be naturally interacting with a Japanese person. I don't think at any point that I think I say I speak English, therefore I'm American. Or I speak Fujianese, and that's what qualifies me as a Fujianese person. It's an empathy that I lack quite a lot. Like I cannot, it's so hard for me to empathize with someone who thinks that speaking a language somehow is natural for you to become that culture. The answer is all of the above. For me, it's all of the above. And that's how I come to be very associated and motivated to learn Japanese. I learned Japanese because it's something extra to me. It's extra. It complements my person. I don't have to actively reject something in order to become something I am not, right? However, if that keeps you motivated, right? Wanting to be Japanese for the rest of your life, unattainable goals, and ideal goals are motivation, so it can be motivation for a lifetime. You can be motivated, like for example, I want to be a kind person, right? That is when I'm telling myself I want to be a kind person, that is unrealistic. It is idealistic because I don't get to choose when someone thinks I'm a kind person or not. But there will be someone in this universe that comes to me and say, "You're not a kind person." That doesn't mean I won't stop trying, right? So if being Japanese, in my opinion, or wanting to be Japanese is what motivates you to learn Japanese, go for it, right? Definitely go for it. With that said, I think a vast majority of people spend time beating themselves up for something that keeps reminding them that they can't attain it, right? It's kind of like that cue the anime with a villain that truly believes they can seek perfection, right? So they go through every possible route. They even defeat themselves. The villain quite metaphorically and literally defeat themselves because they were trying to attain the unattainable. So their obsession with their goal was their downfall, right? And that's kind of like a human condition thing. So hopefully for me, any Japanese you learn is more Japanese you learned yesterday. Feel free to share with me, like, because I'm not grading you on perfection. Like, in fact, I don't rarely ever think that. Hear me out. I'm gonna speak for myself. I don't want people to only speak English like me. That is arrogant. That is so ridiculously reductive that it's the most unrealistic thing I can possibly hear someone dedicating their life to. So in any way, how unrealistic is it? Do you want to be like a group or identical to a group that is not you yet? They can be part of you, certainly. That's my personal take on it. I want to have some of the Japanese stuff. I want to learn the Japanese language. I want to learn the Japanese culture. I'm not going to spend my entire life rejecting English and rejecting everything else in order to make space for being Japanese. Other people can choose to do that. However, I didn't. I think growing up in a life where I'm constantly reminded that I'm not one thing is probably make me a little biased in this. I'm greedy. I'm a very greedy person. I want to learn to interact and speak Japanese and interact with the Japanese culture, while in the meantime also continue to know how to interact with other Americans and then second gen diaspora from China. So I want all these things. So that's the unrealistic goal that I have, where I want to be all of these things at once. And yeah, certainly they're going to create conflicts within themselves, which doesn't lead to rejection. I don't think saying here, like a fictitious, listen, that's fine, okay? If you don't think so. Here's one. Those videos, those trendy videos. Here's a trendy video that is super hot from the TikTok era. So I'm guessing this was a TikTok trend first. Do like this, not like that videos. When someone says something like they pick apart something, right? There are lines. Here's one. Usually they would use a Japanese train station. Japanese train station. And then they would pick something like New York City train station. And then it would be a hot take because it would be like a 30-second clip, right? Do like this. It will show like Shinjuku Station or something. Shinjuku Station. And then suddenly it's like not like this. And it would be like Grand Central Station in New York City, right? And then immediately I'm thinking, this is probably a the highly likely case, because of how the internet works a lot of times, my guess, the deduction is there's a higher than 50% chance that this person is a disgruntled American who wants to be Japanese. Like, wants to be a simulator of Japanese culture. Because not only does this video take all of this out of context, there's no balance in representation. Right? Like, oh, okay, well, and what does this do? It's mere exposure. There was a great essay. I don't know if anyone has read this essay. Someone did read this essay because I suggested. There was an essay called I think it's called The Myth of Asian Superiority. It's called The Harmful... Oh, sorry, here it is. It's by Ronald Takaki, I think. Hang on, let me... Yeah, here we go. I think it's Ronald Takaki. And he wrote an essay called The Harmful Myth of Asian Superiority. And while it is somewhat of a persuasive piece, it gives like a bit of relevance to how perception is through mere exposure. It's so topical now. It was written way long ago. Like it was written kind of at the early onsets of the internet age. So it's largely pre-modern hyper efficient YouTube age. So the myth is that through mere exposure, you come to expect certain things. And the internet has exacerbated this. So it's gotten to the point where words like fake and authentic and originality and stuff has taken a shape in order to perceive unintentional derogatory intent. To the point where someone like myself have problems understanding the intent by the way they use language. As in, oh, yeah, I like fake stuff every once in a while too. It's like, what do you mean by fake stuff? Like, oh, this sushi this is fake sushi, right? I mean, it's not like it's coming from the real thing. I'm like, I mean, it's sushi, like you eat it, so it's clearly real. What part of it is fake? It's like, well, it's fake. And I'm like, no, I don't know. Can you explain it to me? And then they're like, well, it has like fish. And I'm like, so there's fish in both. It's like, well, the way they prepare the fish is fake. I'm like, well, they're chefs and they prepare the fish. Like, well, do you know exactly why it's more fake than the other? It's like, well, it's an imitation of the real thing. Like, okay, can you distinguish between how it's fake and real? Like, can you give me a more in-depth perception? It's like, oh no, and then it comes down to like, well, it's not prepared by a Japanese person on Japanese land, so it's clearly fake. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, that's fine. Like, if they're able to explain it and I can't refute it, then certainly that's the reality. It's disappointing that the word fake has been associated with something that requires an arbitrary condition as to the location and the type of person. Now, hear me out. You might be thinking, well, it's just the person that matters, right? No, it doesn't. Because when a Chinese person makes Chinese food in the United States, it's fake. Yep. Fictitious knew where this was going. The reason why I bring this up a lot is because it was part of my early life. Like, it's still part of my life, not as much anymore because my parents has retired from the Chinese food, like making Chinese food for people in the United States. However, now you get to the point where let's do something topical. Italian food in the United States. I'm not Italian, right? I'm not Italian. However, I can tell you, I grew up alongside Italian Americans. Largely because Italian Americans are also enriched in the same place that Chinese Americans are, which is New York, New York City, like around New York in general, because that's the one of the cultural hubs, right? And you get to this point where someone comes up and is like, "Oh yeah, this is fake pizza," and I'm like, "Okay, all right, can you tell me what's fake about the pizza? Like, is there a reason for that?" And they're like, "Well, it doesn't taste the same." And it's like, I know one is made here and one is made over there. So, what does that? How does that make it fake? It's like, well, one. I like the taste of one better than the other. It's like, oh, so everything you like the taste of is real, and all the things that you dislike is fake, or like less is fake. If that is your definition, please tell me that first, right? Because I need to know. Because fake now means two different things. It can be fake if it's not made by the people in the exact same location, and then it can be fake because they don't like the taste of it, because they taste a better version of it. Now you're getting to the point where you have the YouTube perspective, right? You have YouTube perspective. What is a YouTube perspective? Something is fake when it doesn't meet the idealistic definition of any singular person you meet online. Now, do you tell me if that is realistic? We're going to go back to our first theme today. Tell me, is it realistic to use vocabulary in English? We're talking about English right now. To use vocabulary in a way that designate idealistic expectations to communicate with other people. And that is what I've discovered when I'm learning Japanese and Chinese. I've discovered that while we love talking about the specificity of Japanese language and Chinese language, like how do you say this specific, how to say that specifically, it reminds me mostly, a lot of times, the people who are using English, they use English like this. They use English idealistically. And my first thought was, boy, howdy, what would happen if Japanese and Chinese, I don't actually know. I haven't gotten a chance to ask a Japanese person or a Chinese person. Do they have this conflict of interest all the time with their language? Like, if a Japanese person says, oh, this is a hamburger, right? A hamburg steak or something. Are they saying this is fake hamburger? Or is this real hamburger? Like, English has become a very touchy subject, right? English is the vehicle in which controversy is built because it's the bridging language. Now the question is it happening with Chinese or Japanese as well? I have yet to find that out. Learning Chinese and Japanese have constantly reminded me that English have been kind of a different aspect now. It's been accruing a different aspect, and that's kind of like an aggressive layman colloquialism. I'm sure a linguist and an etymologist of linguistics and stuff will have a better explainer of this. But this is my anecdotal experience. I have not encountered this type of thing so aggressively until I started learning another language. I've often been described. You have. Oh wait. So not having a clear accent. I like to think I speak international English, whatever that is. Yeah, I speak international English as well, actually. Even though I spend most of my time in the United States, I think I speak international English. And what is international English other than the internet? International language? English? International English, perhaps? Or I'm learning how to speak the internet English because I need to understand what fake means and all these things now because I don't usually speak this way, right? You've often been described as a perfectionist. I'm working on it. I still struggle with it, especially when speaking. Yeah, I think it hurts me a lot when someone keeps beating themselves about. If you're happy though, I understand that. Sometimes I think the most disappointing thing, and it's a twofold problem. It's at least a twofold, at least a twofold problem. When someone has idealism in language learning, especially for natural language, if they chose a natural language, not like Python or C++ or something like that, right? Not a computer language. Idealistically, oftentimes, if you encounter some form of toxicity, which was something we talked about the other day, toxicity, it usually comes from a kind place, I feel. It comes from a kind place. However, oftentimes, what is disappointing to me is how upset the other person is. And I get that feeling a lot. Like, much more than I thought learning would bring, right? I'm going to romanticize this. I'm a romantic when it comes to learning. Learning is like air to me. If you dislike learning and then dislike interacting with people that learn, it's a vicious cycle, right? On the one hand, you could say you like learning, but you hate seeing people learn. And it's not a, like, I'm not saying it's a permanent thing or a personality thing. Oftentimes it can be very difficult for someone who have learned, the learned person viewing back on someone who is learning, right? It's I would say this is a human condition, something core. Yet the amount of like projected negativity can be very telling of someone who either constantly have an idolized perception of their expectations or a more quote unquote, I'm going to say realistic perception. And video games and enjoying like novels, television shows, reading books, that can feed into it. Now, if you're super happy and you're overall really, really happy of your expectations, then that's great. This is, I'm not regarding those people who have a happy relationship. The ones that end up speaking out to me or at me are those who typically self-select themselves into something that is very negative. As in, when I play a video game and it's a video game they don't like, right? And I know this from experience, 5+ years. When it's a video game, I play a video game for like 100 hours, or I stream quite a lot of it. Someone would come in and say, yo, this video game is garbage. Or more recently, someone came in and said, is this game dead? Or is this game still dead? I'm like, are you okay? Like, do you have a problem? Like, did this game hurt you in any way? I'm not entirely sure why you would initiate a conversation in which it's pretty much the opposite of what you see. Well, this game is clearly not dead because I'm playing it. And this game is clearly not garbage because I'm playing it. In the sense of what they're talking about, right? You like learning from mistakes on WaniKani, for example, but in oral conversation, I still feel that pressure to aim for perfection. Yeah, I can understand. Which actually feels like it's impeding progress. Ooh, intriguing. At least you're aware of it. Yeah. I would agree that American pizza is not the same as Italian pizza, and I guess we all can agree pizza originated from Italy. Still, I would never use the word fake to describe American pizza. Yeah, just like I wouldn't describe escargot as fake snail food compared to Chinese cuisine, right? I'm kidding. Sorry, French people. And it's okay. Gecko is Belgian, right? No, I'm kidding. Sorry, that was so out of turn. I'm reminding myself all the things that you're telling me about your background. But yes. I mean, like, Chinese people eat snails too. So it's funny that whenever hear me out here. One last funny like fake here one last funny fake situation from my own stories. When someone was surprised that Chinese people have a dish that serves snails, and they said, "Oh, so this is like escargot, but fake escargot." And I'm like, "What?" And then I asked them a question like, "So, what is fake about it?" Like, well, it's not escargot. It's like, oh, okay. So your only qualification is if it's not like escargot, then everything else is fake. It's like, okay, I'm okay with that. It's past your bedtime. Yeah, take care, Gecko. It's always been a pleasure to have these discussions. Great talk again. Yes. Wow, the only thing I have against Chinese right now as a language is that I keep trying to read it as Japanese. What you call it, Blair, for your comment, this game murdered, unalived your family. Oh boy, Petitious. We're gonna need to seek some help for that one. Hey, Blair, I got something for you for this. I was reading, this is related to WaniKani and Hanzahiro. So I was reading the Hanzahiro forum, and there's a new thread that was a little popping off. Basically, they were talking about everybody that came from WaniKani. So because there's a connection between WaniKani and Hanzahiro, not only by their app design, but also all the people that use it, right? Because Chinese and Japanese, right? Japanese here, Chinese here. And there was a growing discussion about language laddering. Which is basically using your target language, your second target language to learn your third, right? Or the other way around. You're basically using another target language to learn another target language. And this is supposed to be in the sense of all of this would then be I translate from Japanese to Chinese, or I use Chinese to translate into Japanese, right? Which neither of these can do. WaniKani and Hanzahiro cannot do this, right? You can't change the whole thing into not English. You can't change all of this into Chinese, so then you have to translate everything into Chinese, right? That being said, I think there's a different, you could do like spot laddering. And that's kind of what I think of when you're making that funny comment. The only thing you have against Chinese right now as a language is that you keep trying to read it in Japanese. And I actually think that makes a great case for using WaniKani and Hanzahiro at the same time. Or like using, I don't know, an English, Japanese, Chinese dictionary or something like that. But those things don't exist yet, which I think would be really cool. It would be really... Now, what I mean is you can tweak some stuff. You can layer like a plugin on top of a plugin, or what have you, like, you know, a pleco on top of a Boom Pro or something to get a similar experience. But this became a really hot topic. And Kevin from WaniKani, which I mean from Kevin from Hansa Hero, made a comment about like he's not like really interested in Anki, but like because he considered language laddering with like Japanese as well. And lots of people have talked about this topic so often, and I'm just gonna have to apologize or not apologize. Sorry, not sorry, Blair, in advance. But that's probably happening because largely I'm the one that's laddering a little bit. But it is something to consider, language laddering. I do hope to try to do this in the future, where like maybe I could get ChatGPT. Hear me out here. This is a pretty good one that I might think of doing. I tell ChatGPT to only respond in Mandarin. However, or I want them to respond in Mandarin when explaining things. However, when I'm role playing with ChatGPT, I want it to output in Japanese. Meanwhile, on my end, I'm then doing these two things into English. That's what I think is going to get me into a situation where I'm going to be able to spend one place to tackle all the to explain what it's like in my head a lot of times. So it will be interesting if I can get the thing. Yeah, it's okay. Escargot is not really a big thing in Belgium. We very much associate with French and French people as well. So we're good. Have a good one, Gecko. Can confirm. No ownership conflicts with escargot. Anyways, we're gonna try to do some of these things in the future. Maybe it'll be this is a social experiment. I think there's still a lot of maybes when it comes to the attractiveness of language laddering, where you do language laddering where you have like staggered elements, staggered level of competence in multiple languages. But it will be a very fun thing to do in the future. So this type of interaction is way different from this, like this stuff. So I look forward to doing that. Anyways, maybe a little bit in the future, I might get you to learn Korean. I'm kidding. You can probably stagger something with Korean, right? Maybe you bridge it using Hanja. I don't know if we're ever gonna get to this, Blair, but I could see myself using Hanja in a way to bridge into Korean. That would be really fun. So like in the future is like, how do you reinforce Chinese and Japanese while dabbling in Korean? You could use this in order to translate into this. Largely because you're proficient in Hanzi and Kanji. I thought that would be a thing to consider. Because hear me out, Blair. This is gonna be. I don't want to pressure you or anything, but if you know Japanese and you're invested in Japanese, it gives you a way into Hanzi, right? Hanja. Hanja is using the Chinese characters, which are also Japanese characters, to write Korean. So if you know kanji and Hanzi, by extension, this is another way in which you can ladder a language into Korean. So you can use your experience that you're accumulating from your exposure to kanji, which then can be used for Hanzi, which then can be used for Hanja to learn Korean counterpart. So instead of constantly sticking to Roman characters, right? So it is a different bridge. Like, my large consideration now is that at some point I will use Roman characters in a different way so that I can use Japanese characters with Chinese characters. And it would be interesting to see how this branches. Cool. No plans for like the other types of writing, but this one has been really cool to learn that you can use your existing target language to try to learn another language in the sense. And I think I'm using Japanese in that same sense. I'm using Chinese and Japanese interchangeably in that sense. Like, if something reminds me of something in Chinese, I'm deliberately using that connection to make it my choice, my default in understanding. I'm not using English as a default to remembering things. I'm using the other language that I'm learning as a default, right? Like, 谁地高 this doesn't have a meaning. I don't know what narwhal is in Chinese. Ge or ge, jie, 脚 or 腿 头 treasure. We'll just say 钱 天 evening 晚上 晚上 孩子小 bow. I don't have a bow. I don't have a flag. 头发 5天小文月 right? 平 we're gonna use 才火 搞 and king 晚上 middle 中 ben rice patty 缅地 I don't know. I said rice ground. Actually, I'm not sure about white's tone. 眼睛 stand to stand up. Question mark. 牛 and private. I don't know. 自己 myself maybe, or something like private, myself, being with myself. So yeah, so not like it was relatively quick, right? Relatively quick, and that's what I'm thinking most of the time as well. So it's not only English but Chinese, and and I actually said knife. I didn't say sword, right? For those who know Chinese, I'm basically using Chinese to best translate what I know in English, which is for Japanese. And I think that goes a long way. In my opinion, it's a lot of fun. I don't know if that's how people think of things when they're laddering, but yeah. Or I can do the opposite, which I will use like this is water in English, so it's 水 right? In Chinese. So you could use English to bridge the two as well, or you can jump straight to it. Which in this case, since it's these are characters, it's to me, quote unquote, it's more habit forming to go straight to Chinese, straight to Hanzi, right? Because it literally looks like it. So now not only are you discouraging yourself, or like, quote unquote, if you want to not use English, right? When someone says not use English, then you don't have to. Largely the alternative meaning is what you're learning in in Chinese. So you not only do you not have to force yourself not to use English, it's almost natural to, like, quote unquote, the representation is legitimately overlapping, right? This is largely probably why I don't find Japanese, in my opinion, Japanese and Chinese different. As in, when someone says, "Oh, do you split your time up?" We get this question a lot. Do you split your time up studying Chinese or Japanese, right? When I'm studying like this, I'm studying both. I'm practicing both. Maybe I'm not learning both, right? I'm not learning a lot from both. I do learn occasionally. I'm like, oh, so this means this in Japanese. Meanwhile, this means this in Chinese. So I learned something in context with the two, right? However, I'm reinforcing my Chinese when I'm looking at this. And when I'm using Hanzi Hero, I'm reinforcing my Japanese. It's actually the stuff that I know really, really well. It's it takes like a split second. You don't have to, expound upon it. And I did not talk about this at all yet, because we usually use English, right? But it takes me a while. It takes me a bit to when I don't know the English translation, I rely on the Chinese. So sometimes I think of the Chinese and it takes me a little bit to get to the English, because it still takes time, right? You're still thinking of more than one thing. So I don't want to give anyone the impression that if you can somehow think of a lot of things and not use more time. When you think of more things, you use up more time. Now you can become more efficient at all those things, and then what took like 3 minutes can be like 1 minute still, even though you're thinking of more things, because it becomes easier to think of those things, like faster to think of those things. Like this stuff is not faster if I didn't learn Chinese, in my opinion. Like personally, if I wanted to give like a different take on this that isn't like someone who's only learning Japanese and someone who's only learning Chinese, and and answering that question over a lot of times, does Chinese help you or interfere or make learning Japanese harder, etc.? Is it more confusing? For myself personally, no, it's not. In fact, the confusion, the potential points of confusion, are the reasons why things are becoming easier and faster, in my opinion, because there are two different ways now to remember things. One is literal in representation, and one is English. It's in translation, right? So it's pretty cool, at least in my opinion. Honestly, I think Japanese gets an egg in the face because I always start the day with Japanese. And then when I start with Japanese, it warms me up for Chinese. So what happens is whatever comes first, I'm more warmed up for the day than the other. So since I kept this order, I was reflecting upon this because Duolingo review is going to cover this. One day, I think I'm going to switch the order and see if this suspicion is correct. Because oftentimes when you get warmed up at looking at ideograms, when my internet, I still use in American Windows, just so that everyone knows, I still use American English Windows. So every time I type on Google and all that stuff, it's still the majority of the characters and stuff that I see on my interface is English. So it does take a little bit of time to switch over, like, okay, I gotta get used to looking at these again. And when I'm being a little time, it's not noticeable because by the time I start, it takes like a few seconds, right, to adjust. However, it's really neat. I don't want to promise people results. It's something worth trying. It's something worth trying. I think it's fun when you're solving problems with tools that you don't understand yet, or tools that you're describing, right? WaniKani is cool because it's a new tool that is not Duolingo. So while I'm learning Japanese, I'm learning how WaniKani works. When I'm learning Chinese, I'm learning how Hanzahiro works and how it's related and not related to WaniKani. So I'm learning more than just the content itself. I'm also learning something about the developer's design and differences in the developer's design. Kind of like reading a story, not just for yourself, but also to discover what the person's intent was behind the story. Discover a little bit about the person themselves who made and wrote the story. It's not exclusive. It's not one or the other. It's both. Now, when something is boring to you, it might not be so boring if you phrase it in a way like, wait, the author wrote this. Why would the author write something that I find boring, right? Like what were going across their minds? And then you suddenly have a feeling where like, oh wait, this isn't realistic to me. We're going back to the very first start of this digression. This really isn't realistic to me. But why would someone might think it's realistic to them? Or this character seems like it's out of character, as in like this decision making is weird. Like what the heck? This guy is just being plain silly with their character development. And then I stop and pause and think about, well, what are the animators and the writers thinking at this point? Like, what could connect the dots between what they're trying to do with this character and not? So things that become disinteresting or not so interesting, or maybe you'll brush it aside, become a little bit more interesting for a different reason. And this is not a competition, as in whose perspective is more important. Is it your perspective, or is it the author or writer's perspective? The understanding is you are a human being that can encapsulate both of these ideas. The reason why I love doing this is because then more moments of someone's life is meaningful. If you like a show a lot, that's what I'm talking about. When you like a show a lot intrinsically to yourself, then that show, most of its moments is great, right? Of course, there are some down moments, but hear me out. If you're thinking like I am, in my opinion, not that you have to, even those low moments in the show that you like become interesting, at least. They don't become disinteresting, right? It's, oh yeah, I'm gonna skip this part. It's not my favorite part, but here, let's go back to. I love this show, but there are a few crappy poems. Let's go fast forward through them. Instead, you could find interest in them in a different way, right? Now those are the ideal situations. Ideal situations are shows you love have to be exactly what you expect. It resonates with you, it panders to you, it hits exactly the way you need to hit. So how do you get interested in things that don't do that? Which is probably the vast majority of things. So here you get to a person who likes very few things. So if this person continues to be happy, right? Awesome. Right? Awesome. However, if this person progressively begins to be unhappy, as in bored or depressed, then they're too strict. It's too idealistic. So there are very few things that they like because a lot of them don't fall into the things that they don't like. Like they don't like things enough, right? And when you like things, you have to be interested in it. So over time, a human condition, this is a beautiful human condition, by the way. The more you spend being interested in something, you develop a different type of fondness. And that's through understanding. So here's a personal anecdote. If I met my former bully, right? If I met my former bully, I would not hate the bully. I would try to understand them. And who knows? We could be friends. The road to like a specific type of forgiveness or disappointment or betrayal can often be through the development of understanding. So, yeah, it's difficult for me to think that something that can be off-putting at first, right? Like, I don't know, your favorite show got turned into your favorite anime show got turned into a live action, and it took a dumpster on all your perceptions. Like, okay, can you find any redeeming quality in it? Well, you could say no, and it's like, it's insignificant, it doesn't impact your life. If it causes you to spend day and night or rejecting everything that you want, that you liked before, then we're talking about a situation where this can happen. Like, this would be very pragmatic to do. Like, someone says, oh, season 4 sucked, so therefore season 1 through 3 sucks now. The reason why I'm smiling is because this is the logic that I encounter far more from those who are unhappy in general, or gives me signs of being unhappy. Everything that comes after will impact their perception of what comes before, right? So, what's a comment that will illustrate this? Well, you know, eventually, if a show runs long enough, it will miss. Not if it will miss, or if it misses, it will miss. And then that will sour their experience with everything else. Think about, in my opinion, I like to think this would not affect their interpersonal skills, right? I would like to think a person that says that have reasonable interpersonal skills. Right? Right? Hopefully, right? Because the last time you think about it is if your friend made you angry. You know, you've been with this person for 15 years and they made you angry once. Do you stop being their friend? Well, I like to think some people say, oh, but for the more important things, you learn to be more tolerant, right? Or tolerant, or understand, it depends kind of situation. You're going to say, it depends kind of situation. And I get that. I totally get that, because friends are more important. It's not the same as a TV show. Fair enough. It's not the same as a TV show. The question is it easier, or are you more reasonable if you behave or practice behaving a certain way when this happens, or you don't and this happens. So oftentimes you go back to how often are you upset? If you're upset all the time, what are the chances that people around you are going to be upset? Probably more likely. So yesterday we talked about comp toxicity. Right, let's relate it back to yesterday. Comp toxicity, like competitive games, right? PvP games. If those people spend 50% of their time, they're just going to choose an arbitrator, the majority of the time playing a game in which they are upset, what are the chances that their interpersonal communication skills are influenced by this? Probably very likely. So when they express themselves outside of this situation, then they no longer are competent in that situation. Here we go, right? And for me, well, let's go back to how we got here, the Chinese and Japanese thing. I think it's cool because I spend a lot of time thinking about Chinese and Japanese all the time, you know? It's kind of a cool thing. Not against, but with. Offering a counter perspective, but also not obligatory. I just expect Blair to be multilingual at some point to match my interests, because I'm very high standards. I'm kidding, Blair. No pressure. But if you secretly know Chinese in the background, I wouldn't be surprised either. All right. Let's do our final review. Today was a short day, so we had plenty of time to digress, right? We met our 3-hour quota. I'm kidding. There aren't any quotas for this. All right, so I'm gonna review my usual review things to end the day. So we're using one word English, right? One word English here. So let's do that. Water, dirt, sword, narwhal, street, legs, head, treasure, 1,000, evening, child, small, bow, flag, hair, 5, heaven, hand, writing, moon, stop, leaf, fire, dog, king, middle, book, rice patty. Okay, maybe 2 words. 1 to 2 words. I keep forgetting about rice patty. White, eye, stand, cow, private. Right? Okay, so for kanji, we're going to go over the reads first. Reads, and specifically onyomi. So let's do that first. Okay. So wait, is that the re for onyomi? I guess. To, do, sen, yu, shi, sho, qiao, cho, not qiao, cho, cho, maru, sai, chu, go, roku, en, ten, te, bun, mon, Which one do we? Nichi? Nichi and Jitsu. Nichi, Jitsu. Getsu, Gatsu. Hon. No, not Hon. Whoops. Ki. Wait, not Ki. Wait, is it Ki? We'll go with Ki, but we're gonna put a dot here. Oh, no, it's not. It's Moku. Sorry. Moku. Moku. Moku and this a pass too. I think Sui, yeah, Sui works because of Chinese. Sui. Sui. Ka. Inu. O. Shitsu. Yu. Shi. Sa. On. Se. Sho. Ama. A. Haku. Haku. Hako. Haku. Haku. Me. Ritsu. Noma. Okay. Alright, so we did that. Do we need the mnemonics though? I think we're okay without the mnemonics. Radicals will still use one English words, and then reads will do onyomi, and then vocabulary words will come up on a mistake basis or a pause basis. So that's kind of the routine that we're going to go with now. So for vocabulary, which is purple, which happens to be the color of this, for vocabulary, during the lessons or during lessons and review, I will make note in the time at the specific moment that I pause. So below average, we're going to say below average response time. We'll make note of vocabulary that's below response, and then we'll go over its mnemonics. Right. Mnemonics. Maybe add something. Add additional stuff to make it quicker or more vivid. And then read. And read have to understand its own exceptions or kun, right? Kun, or even special, right? Because there are special examples now too. So we had a special example, and then we have an own kun things like okurigana, the idea of okurigana and rendaku, right? And rendaku, okurigana, kugugo, wait, is it kugugo? Yeah, kugugo, right? And then like numbers and special occasions, that kind of thing. So that's how we are going to review it. And we're going to review it on this right hand side. So it's going to be on this panel, right? And that's what we're going to do for the next maybe 2 months. So by day 60. We'll see what happens in day 60. We'll switch it up in day 60. Something like that. Or at least this is the current tentative way we're gonna do our final review. I don't know what I'm gonna do in the beginning though. So oftentimes so this is gonna be at the end session. This is our end session routine now. That's what we're gonna do. It looks like a normal facet. The middle portion is a normal facet. There's gonna be a digression sometimes. And it usually features Gecko and the likes. I think I really like this type of thing. The digressions are big. However, it's gonna be related eventually to language learning. I typically relate it back. Largely because that's what we're doing. And I try my best to keep it relevant. Personally, most things are relevant to learning experiences. These, in my opinion, are conversations that friends and families typically are a very healthy way to talk about things. And I truly believe, in my opinion, that learning and discussion go hand in hand, right? Finding motivation, understanding people, it goes hand in hand, and it's an investment. It's an investment that has unknown potential, but there is potential, right? So it's going to be in the middle. In the beginning, I have no idea what we're going to place in the beginning. I think in the beginning will be where I repeat mistakes. So maybe if it gets to a point where I accumulative in mistakes, we're going to go over the mistakes section. So I did make 2 errors yesterday, which I went over today in the morning, or in the beginning of this session, which was strength, right, or power, and then how I made the typo on Ju, right, or on 10. Those are probably where we're going to go in the beginning. And then at the end, we'll do this. And that's kind of going to be our routine. And eventually it's going to get faster, so then we'll do other things. Anyways, that's a wrap for WaniKani for today. A little bit longer than usual. And as a reminder, tomorrow's WaniKani session is going to be a lot later. Like, my stream is going to start a lot later because I have to go to the airport. My mother is returning from her international flight or international trip, so it's gonna be much later. We're gonna try to squeeze it in, and tomorrow it's probably gonna be a little bit faster because it looks like we have at least possibly 8 lessons dealing with. Oh no, wait. I guess lessons are kanji lessons and radical lessons, right? They're not vocabulary. We might have more vocabulary, but I don't know if it's direct one-to-one vocabulary. But we will be having vocabulary lessons tomorrow. So that's exciting. So something that deals with sword, like these characters. I could see like child, maybe counting things. Describing position, possibly. There's counting things, position, maybe something to do with earth, and then something with a sword. It might end up being the vocabulary themselves, like the kanji is the vocabulary word. Alright, that's a wrap for today. Thanks for hanging out, thanks for chilling. If you're gonna watch this later, arigatou gozaimasu, right? So, for those who are only interested in Japanese and WaniKani, atane, jane. I'm gonna get up, walk around, hydrate a little, stretch, and I'll be back for Hanzo Hero. Thank you.